There's a type of person who makes society deeply uncomfortable without even trying. They don't seek attention. They don't cause drama. They don't rebel openly against social norms. Yet something about their very existence triggers a collective anxiety that runs through communities like an underground current. Arthur Schopenhauer, himself one of these unsettling figures, understood this phenomenon with brutal clarity. He saw how society instinctively identifies and attempts to neutralize those who embody what he called the dangerous combination: high intelligence coupled with genuine independence. These aren't your typical antisocial individuals or attention-seeking rebels. We're talking about people who choose solitude not from social awkwardness or misanthropy, but from a profound understanding that most human interaction operates on levels of deception, performance, and mutual manipulation that they find exhausting and pointless. They possess the intellectual capacity to see through social games while having the emotional strength to opt out entirely. And that terrifies the collective unconscious of society in ways that few people consciously understand. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." But what he also understood, and what institutions instinctively fear, is that someone who is truly free cannot be controlled, manipulated, or used to serve the needs of the collective. They represent a threat to the fundamental mechanisms through which society maintains order and compliance. Today, I want to reveal why highly intelligent loners trigger such deep anxiety in social groups, how groups systematically attempt to undermine and destroy their independence, and most importantly, why understanding this dynamic is crucial for anyone who has ever felt like they don't quite fit into the world around them. Because if you've ever been labeled as too independent, too analytical, or too selective with your social energy, you're witnessing something far more significant than personal preference. You're seeing the collision between individual consciousness and collective control. The first reason institutions target intelligent loners is perhaps the most fundamental. They cannot be easily categorized, predicted, or manipulated through conventional social mechanisms. Most people operate within predictable patterns. They need approval. They crave belonging. They modify their behavior to maintain social standing. This predictability is what allows institutions, governments, corporations, and social groups to function effectively. But intelligent loners have already solved their core psychological needs internally. They don't need external validation because they've developed robust internal validation systems. They don't fear social rejection because they genuinely prefer their own company to most social interactions. They don't modify their opinions to fit group consensus because they've done the intellectual work to develop positions based on evidence rather than social pressure. Schopenhauer recognized this when he observed that the person who does not need others is the person others cannot use. This independence creates what psychologists now call social unpredictability, the inability of groups to anticipate how someone will respond to typical social pressures. When you can't predict someone's behavior through conventional rewards and punishments, they become a wild card in social systems that depend on conformity for stability. Think about how this plays out in practical situations. In workplace environments, intelligent loners are often the ones who point out that popular strategies won't work, who refuse to participate in groupthink decision-making, who choose projects based on intellectual merit rather than political advantage. They can't be bought with promotions they don't want or threatened with isolation they actually prefer. This makes them simultaneously valuable for their insights and dangerous for their independence. The second source of collective anxiety runs even deeper. Intelligent loners serve as living proof that the social contract is optional. Most people believe, consciously or unconsciously, that human beings need constant social interaction, group membership, and external validation to be psychologically healthy. The mere existence of someone who thrives in solitude challenges this fundamental assumption about human nature. When others see an intelligent loner who is genuinely content, productive, and emotionally stable while living largely outside conventional social structures, it raises uncomfortable questions about their own choices. If this person can be happy alone, what does that say about my desperate need for constant social stimulation? If they can think independently without group validation, why do I feel so anxious when my opinions differ from my peer group? Schopenhauer understood that most people live what he called lives of quiet desperation, going through the motions of social participation, not because it genuinely fulfills them, but because they cannot imagine alternatives. The intelligent loner represents a terrifying possibility that all the social obligations, networking events, small talk, and group activities that consume most people's lives might actually be unnecessary for happiness and success. This creates a psychological phenomenon known as existential threat, when the mere existence of another person's lifestyle challenges your core beliefs about how life should be lived. Rather than questioning their own assumptions, most people find it easier to dismiss the intelligent loner as abnormal, antisocial, or somehow defective. It's a defense mechanism that protects their worldview while attempting to neutralize the threat to their psychological comfort. The third reason systems work to eliminate intelligent loners is perhaps the most insidious. They possess what Schopenhauer called the dangerous gift of seeing clearly. Their combination of high intelligence and emotional independence from social pressure allows them to observe human behavior, institutional failures, and societal problems with unusual clarity. They're not invested in maintaining illusions that make others comfortable, so they often see and speak truths that groups would prefer to keep hidden. This clarity manifests in several ways that make social systems deeply uncomfortable. They notice when leaders' actions contradict their stated values. They identify systemic problems that everyone else is pretending don't exist. They ask questions that expose the gap between what institutions claim to do and what they actually accomplish. They remain calm and analytical in situations where others are driven by emotion, allowing them to see manipulative tactics that work on more reactive personalities. Most dangerously of all, they often possess the intellectual honesty to acknowledge when popular solutions won't work, when beloved leaders are incompetent, or when widely accepted beliefs are based on wishful thinking rather than evidence. This makes them invaluable sources of genuine insight and absolute nightmares for anyone whose power depends on maintaining comfortable illusions. History is full of intelligent loners who were ostracized, attacked, or destroyed precisely because their clarity threatened existing power structures. Schopenhauer himself faced decades of professional isolation because his philosophical insights undermined the optimistic assumptions that his academic colleagues needed to maintain. The pattern repeats across cultures and centuries. Institutions claim to value truth and independent thinking, while systematically punishing those who actually practice these virtues. The fourth source of institutional resistance is more subtle, but equally powerful. Intelligent loners demonstrate that social status and material success are often inversely related to wisdom and genuine fulfillment. While culture teaches that happiness comes from climbing social hierarchies, accumulating wealth, and gaining recognition from others, intelligent loners often achieve deep satisfaction through internal development, intellectual pursuits, and chosen solitude. This creates what psychologists call status anxiety in others who have invested heavily in conventional markers of success. If someone can be genuinely content while rejecting the competition for social position, what does that say about the value of all that striving? If they find meaning in ideas, creativity, and personal growth rather than in impressing others, it suggests that much of what society considers important might actually be distraction from more valuable pursuits. Schopenhauer captured this perfectly when he wrote, "A happy life is impossible. The best that a man can attain is a heroic life." Said he understood that genuine fulfillment comes not from achieving what others expect, but from developing one's own capacities in accordance with one's authentic nature. Intelligent loners often embody this philosophy, finding satisfaction in intellectual achievement, creative expression, or spiritual development that has nothing to do with social recognition. This independence from conventional status markers makes them threatening to systems that depend on people competing for artificial scarcity, limited positions, recognition, resources that are valuable precisely because not everyone can have them. Someone who opts out of the competition entirely reveals that the game itself might be pointless, which threatens the entire structure. But society's fear runs much deeper than simple discomfort. There's a systematic campaign happening that most people never recognize. The first and most pervasive attack comes through social pressure disguised as concern for mental health. Institutions have developed a sophisticated narrative that frames solitude as inherently unhealthy, independence as emotional immaturity, and preference for one's own company as a symptom of depression or anxiety. This allows groups to pathologize exactly the traits that make intelligent loners valuable, while appearing to be helpful rather than hostile. You've probably experienced this if you've ever been told you're too isolated, that you need to get out more, or that your preference for solitude indicates you're not taking care of yourself. The underlying message is always the same. Your choices are wrong, your instincts are misguided, and you need to conform to social expectations for your own good. This concern trolling serves multiple functions. It makes the intelligent loner question their own judgment and potentially abandon practices that support their mental clarity. It establishes the group as the authority on what constitutes healthy behavior. Most importantly, it frames independence as a problem to be solved rather than a strength to be valued. Schopenhauer faced this constantly from colleagues who couldn't understand why he didn't seek their approval or participation in academic social circles. Rather than respecting his choices, they consistently framed his solitude as evidence of personality defects or psychological problems. This allowed them to dismiss his insights without engaging with their substance. The second method of coordinated effort targets the intelligent loner's source of strength, their ability to think independently without external validation. Organizations accomplish this through what we might call enforced collaboration, creating systems where independent work is discouraged, individual achievement is downplayed, and group consensus is treated as inherently more valuable than individual insight. This manifests in educational systems that prioritize group projects over individual research, workplace cultures that mandate teamwork for tasks better suited to solo work, and social environments that treat someone's failure to participate in group activities as antisocial behavior. The message is clear: your individual thoughts, insights, and preferences are less valuable than whatever emerges from group processes. The insidious aspect of enforced collaboration is that it's often presented as progressive, inclusive, and beneficial for everyone involved. But for intelligent loners, it represents institutional pressure against their most productive working methods and thinking processes. They're forced to spend energy managing group dynamics that could be directed toward genuine problem solving. They're required to compromise their insights to reach consensus with people who haven't done the intellectual work to understand the issues involved. If you're recognizing these patterns, if you're understanding why your independence has always felt threatening to others rather than inspiring, then you're ready to learn how to protect and cultivate your gifts in a world that fears what you represent. Subscribe. Because what I'm going to share next about developing psychological immunity to social pressure could change how you navigate every relationship and institution in your life. The third attack method is perhaps the most emotionally challenging. Collective resistance works to isolate intelligent loners from potential allies and supporters, while surrounding them with people who reinforce negative judgments about their choices. This creates what psychologists call manufactured consensus, the illusion that everyone agrees that the loner's behavior is problematic, abnormal, or selfish. You might have experienced this in family dynamics, where your preference for solitude becomes a constant source of criticism, with relatives coordinating their concern to make it seem like your choices are obviously wrong. Or in professional environments, where colleagues who privately respect your insights publicly distance themselves to avoid being associated with your difficult reputation. This manufactured consensus serves to make intelligent loners doubt their own perceptions and potentially abandon the practices that support their mental clarity and emotional stability. When everyone around you seems to agree that your behavior is problematic, it requires enormous psychological strength to maintain confidence in your own judgment. The fourth and most sophisticated campaign involves co-opting the language and concepts that intelligent loners use to understand themselves, then redefining those terms in ways that pathologize or diminish their experience. Cultural systems take words like introversion, independence, and selective socializing and reframe them as problems to be overcome rather than legitimate personality traits to be respected. This linguistic hijacking makes it difficult for intelligent loners to even describe their experience without using terminology that has been poisoned with negative connotations. They find themselves constantly defending choices that shouldn't require justification, explaining preferences that should be self-evidently valid, and apologizing for traits that are actually strengths. Schopenhauer recognized this pattern in how philosophical and intellectual concepts were routinely distorted by popular culture and academic institutions. Ideas that threatened existing power structures would be redefined, simplified, or misrepresented until they lost their transformative potential. The same dynamic applies to how culture handles traits that make individuals less controllable and predictable. But here's what institutional powers don't want you to understand about this entire dynamic. Their hostility toward intelligent loners reveals the fragility of the systems they're trying to protect. If conventional social structures were genuinely beneficial and naturally appealing, they wouldn't require such extensive effort to maintain compliance. The fact that intelligent independence threatens these systems suggests that much of what we call normal social functioning is actually elaborate collective self-deception. Schopenhauer understood that the majority of men are not capable of thinking, but only of believing. Social systems depend on this limitation, requiring people to accept premises without examination, to follow leaders without question, to participate in activities without understanding their true purposes. Intelligent loners represent proof that thinking is possible, that independence is achievable, and that much of what passes for necessity is actually choice. This is why organized pressure against intelligent loners is so persistent and coordinated. It's not personal animosity towards specific individuals. It's institutional self-preservation against a way of being that could inspire others to question the entire framework of collective dependence and control. The final piece of this puzzle that systems desperately want to keep hidden is that intelligent loners often produce disproportionate amounts of genuine value precisely because they're not constrained by groupthink, social pressure, or the need for external validation. History's greatest innovations, artistic achievements, and philosophical breakthroughs have often come from people who worked in solitude, thought independently, and refused to compromise their vision to fit social expectations. But acknowledging this would require culture to confront an uncomfortable truth: that much of what passes for collaborative achievement is actually the dilution of individual insight through committee processes, political considerations, and the need to accommodate the limitations of group dynamics. It would mean recognizing that the very traits organizations try to suppress, independence, analytical thinking, comfort with solitude, resistance to social pressure, are exactly what's needed for genuine progress and innovation. Schopenhauer captured this perfectly when he observed that talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. Intelligent loners often possess this capacity for seeing targets that others miss entirely, but institutional pressure to undermine their independence also undermines their ability to contribute their unique insights to collective progress. The tragedy is that systems destroy or marginalize exactly the people who could help solve the most pressing problems, the independent thinkers who see systemic issues clearly, the solitary innovators who develop solutions outside conventional frameworks, the analytical minds who can evaluate popular strategies without emotional attachment to their success. Instead of recognizing and protecting these valuable individuals, social structures treat them as threats to be neutralized rather than resources to be cultivated. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where culture becomes increasingly unable to address complex challenges because it has eliminated the types of minds most capable of genuine problem-solving. But understanding this dynamic also reveals a path forward for intelligent loners who want to contribute their gifts without being destroyed by collective pressure. It's not about becoming antisocial or developing hostility toward others. It's about recognizing that your independence is not a personal failing, but a necessary strength, and that institutional attempts to undermine that independence reveal their own limitations rather than yours. The key is developing what Schopenhauer called the art of being alone, not just physical solitude, but psychological independence from social validation, emotional freedom from group pressure, and intellectual confidence in your own judgment. This isn't isolation from the world. It's freedom to engage with the world on your own terms rather than society's terms. You are not broken because you prefer solitude to small talk, individual work to group projects, or authentic connection to social performance. You are not antisocial because you see through social games that others take seriously. You are not too picky because you refuse to compromise your standards to fit in with groups that don't share your values. You represent something that institutions both need and fear. Proof that independence is possible, that thinking is more valuable than believing, and that genuine fulfillment comes from developing your authentic nature rather than conforming to external expectations. Your task is not to make yourself more palatable to social systems that fear what you represent, but to protect and develop your gifts while finding ways to contribute them that don't require you to abandon your essential nature. The world needs what you can see, what you can think, and what you can create, especially because these gifts emerge from the very independence that makes society uncomfortable. Schopenhauer spent his life as a brilliant loner, facing constant attempts to undermine his independence and dismiss his insights. But his ideas survived and flourished precisely because he refused to compromise his vision to fit social expectations. His example shows that it's possible to maintain your authentic nature while contributing something genuinely valuable to human understanding. Now tell me, have you experienced these coordinated efforts to undermine your independence? Maybe you've been told your solitude is unhealthy, or felt institutional pressure to participate in group activities that drain your energy. Perhaps you've noticed how your questions make others uncomfortable, or felt that strange hostility that emerges when people sense you can't be easily categorized or controlled. Share your experiences below. I want to hear how these dynamics have played out in your life and how you've learned to protect your independence while navigating a world that fears exactly what makes you valuable.